Hello, welcome to the PinkUn YouTube channel. I'm Connor Southwell. We're currently in an international break, and as you may be aware by now, Norwich City have 11 injuries currently. So what we thought we'd do is, basically I've been asked for a list a lot, so what I thought we'd do is put them all in one video with how long people are out, what they're injured with, and try and get through the whole list in about 10 minutes or so to give everyone a nice clear idea of where we stand going into the next game against Bournemouth, which is after this international break. First and foremost, we've got to start with the news that broke today as we're recording this, which is that Jamal Lewis has withdrawn from the Northern Ireland squad. Of course, there was initially some doubt anyway about whether he'd be fit for selection due to that elbow injury that he sustained at Crystal Palace. This looks like it's a new knee injury that he picked up in the 5-1 defeat against Aston Villa. The club have said that they probably expect him to return for Bournemouth, which is good news, although he won't be travelling to the Netherlands or the Czech Republic with the Northern Irish squad to get his 12th cap. Jamal's an interesting one because that left back position is one that Norwich have sort of ploughed on with him, even though perhaps there is Philip Heiser in the background. There is the option to move Max Aarons across and put in Sam Byram, but Jamal Lewis has stayed there. He's looked quite impressive in the Premier League so far. Probably one of the only players that came out with any degree of credit after Saturday's defeat. So Daniel Farke will be hoping that he is fit and available for that Bournemouth game. He will be assessed over the next 2 weeks by the club's medical staff, and we'll get a clearer picture on him come the end of that international break. So that is injury number one, and Jamal Lewis, you might want to strap yourself in. We've got one or two of these. Okay, so the next player who is out injured at the moment is Grant Hanley. Of course, Daniel Farke broke that news prior to the Villa game. Norwich incredibly light at centre-back at the moment, of course having to play Ibrahim Amadou, who is a defensive midfielder by trade, and Ben Godfrey, who we'll come on to I'm sure in a little while as well. Grant Hanley has struggled with fitness really for the last 18 months, ever since he went off in that East Anglian derby against Ipswich Town in the Championship, very early on in the Championship last season. He sort of struggled for any consistency in terms of his fitness and in terms of getting back into the team. Very limited minutes last season, of course had to start this season out of necessity essentially, but we haven't really seen much of him since that before that West Ham game where he picked up a groin injury. I think it was the last international break actually, where he had to pull out of the Scotland squad. Seems like it's a similar injury again, and has been a reoccurring injury over the last 18 months or so. There's not really a return date for Grant Hanley either. This is one where Daniel Farke has said that it's one they need to get assessed, it's one they need to find a solution for. So Grant Hanley over this international break will be going and spending lots of time with specialists, consultants, trying to figure out what exactly is wrong with that groin to try and get him up to match speed. Of course, Norwich desperately need centre-backs at the moment, given the situation, which we're all aware of and which we'll come on to again later with the various players who are out injured. They could need Grant Hanley at Bournemouth, bearing in mind it will probably be dependent on how Ben Godfrey is, and again we'll come on to Ben Godfrey in a second. But yeah, Grant Hanley does need to get this sorted because it is plighting his career and plighting his Norwich City's career. I think there's an argument perhaps to say we haven't seen the Grant Hanley of the first season at Norwich City, where he was so impressive, of course got second in the player of the season vote as well. We haven't seen that player probably since that Ipswich game where he went off injured. So Daniel Farke will be hoping to get him back up to match speed, back up to fitness, so they do have another option at centre-back who they can rely upon. But at the moment, Grant Hanley is another to add to the list. Okay, the next one is a bit more interesting. This is Ben Godfrey, who is currently in this international break getting an operation on a small hernia issue that he's had for about the last 4 weeks, basically since the last international break. I think we saw him pull up for the England 21s, and he struggled with this for the last 4 weeks, and again because of the crisis in terms of centre-backs that Norwich have at their disposal, essentially it's been him and Ibrahim Amadou for the last few fixtures. Norwich have needed him to basically get through games, and that has meant him taking painkillers, it's meant him getting injections, but they have decided that this is the time to get him fully sorted. Of course, many people were shocked when he wasn't selected in Aidy Boothroyd's England under-21 squad for the upcoming internationals, but then given the context of what Daniel Farke told us on Friday, seems quite sensible actually to get Ben Godfrey this operation to see him through to the other side of the international break. Recovery time is supposedly about 9 to 14 days. That's the window that Daniel Farke gave us. He's gone to Munich to see specialists that I'm sure Daniel Farke will trust, bearing in mind they're from his homeland. And hopefully it is a case of days rather than months. So we're not expecting this one to be as serious as perhaps Zimmerman or Closer, which we'll come on to later. But it is one to keep an eye on for that Bournemouth game, because as it stands at the moment, Norwich City have one centre-back available. That's Ibrahim Amadou, and he's not even a centre-back by trade. Of course, played defensive midfield for Sevilla and Lille and various other teams in his career. Has come to Carrow Road, probably hoping to play that same position. Farke's probably been hoping that he'll play that position at some point, but because of the options or limited options, he's found himself at centre-back alongside Ben Godfrey. Godfrey's been a pretty imperious figure for Norwich over the last 18 months throughout that Championship campaign, and also making that step up into the Premier League. Of course, Norwich have conceded a lot of goals, although that seems to me to be more because of the defensive setup as a whole, as opposed to individuals. Godfrey, of course, took the armband as well recently, so a massive presence and someone that Daniel Farke will be hoping to get back very, very soon. Okay, next we come on to the goalkeepers. Ralph Fierman, let's start with him. Had a groin issue prior to Crystal Palace, I think it was. Of course, he then came in, pretty much didn't train all week. Daniel Farke said they'd essentially wrapped him up in bubble wrap to get him into that game. First opening minutes of that game, free kick comes in, Fierman catches the ball, and his groin goes again. It's a groin strain, this one. Although we are expecting him back the other side of the international break, so it'll be interesting to see where Daniel Farke suggests he is come that Bournemouth game. Is that going to come a little bit too soon for Ralph Fierman, or is he actually going to have recovered well enough? Of course, he's got 2 weeks now to fully step up his recovery period, and hopefully they can get him back for that game, just to give him another option. And it's no slight on Michael McGovern, of course, who made the tremendous double save from Wesley's penalty to deny him a hat-trick on Saturday, but Norwich will be hoping to get their two experienced first choice goalkeepers back, Fierman being one of those. Of course, Fierman couldn't save Luka Mirovojic's penalty at Selhurst Park in the Canaries' 2-0 defeat. And the other one is Tim Krul, who suffered a lower back injury in the warm-up at Burnley, took some painkillers and got through that game, as is his character. I think we see Tim Krul as quite a resilient, charismatic Dutch goalkeeper. That's what he's shown at his time at Carrow Road, able to deal with knockbacks. And he did play through the pain barrier at Turf Moor, but wasn't able to do so at Selhurst Park. That back injury pretty much preventing him from doing anything other than gym work, I think Daniel Farke said in that press conference prior to Crystal Palace. He didn't quite make it for the Aston Villa game either, so that's another big presence out of Norwich City's back five essentially, and Tim Krul has been essential to marshalling what has been a very young Norwich back four, if you consider Jamal Lewis, Ben Godfrey and Max Aarons all make that up. He's a massive presence. I think he's proved himself and stepped up another level in the Premier League. There was a lot of doubt, remember, going into him after pre-season. Of course, that's why Ralph Fierman was brought to the club, and now Norwich will be hoping for their number one to come back, and hopefully he will be back for Bournemouth. Okay, the next one is Alex Teti. Of course, played that wonderful game against Manchester City where he did the job that Norwich City probably wished they had on Saturday in terms of that resilient defensive midfielder, dogged, defensively sound option. Of course, we all know what Alex Teti is in terms of his defensive ability. We all know his limitations as well in terms of on the ball, but at the moment Norwich City do lack a balance in their midfield, and Daniel Farke will be hoping that Alex Teti is fit. He was mentioned as maybe a potential for the Villa game, but was sadly ruled out for that. It is again another groin injury, or a quad injury, I think this one. So we're talking about several groin injuries that have happened in games. It does pose the question of whether Norwich's training methods are perhaps overworking their players, or whether this is just luck or a lack of. To me, probably a mixture of the two. I mean, half the injuries are sort of happening in training and half of them are contact injuries, which you cannot prevent. So if you take the contact injuries out of it, Norwich probably only have 3, 4, maybe 5 injuries. We say only, but we sit here with 11. So Norwich will be hoping to get Alex Teti back fit. I think Daniel Farke likes Alex Teti. I think he'll wish that he was available to him at this moment in time, because Kenny McLean and Mo Leitner did look a little bit lightweight, and it's not their fault. I think Kenny McLean played as a number 10 and actually as a wide man at Aberdeen in Scotland, so he's basically being asked to do a role that perhaps he's never done in his career before. So that's an interesting side to it. And that brings me quite on to, nicely to Mario Vrancic, another midfield option that Daniel Farke will wish he had available. Of course, a completely different footballer, I think, in terms of Alex Teti, but perhaps the most balanced player, capable of providing attacking force but also defensive steel as well. Now, this is a bit of an interesting one, because it was initially sort of a calf injury for Vrancic, and we were expecting him to return to team training the week of the Crystal Palace game. That never happened, and then we sort of on his Instagram we've seen pictures of him recovering alongside Onel Hernandez. So again, we were kind of expecting it to be after the Palace game. It wasn't. We're still waiting for Mario Vrancic. It looks like we're going to be waiting until after the international break now, and to see whether or not he's fit enough for that Bournemouth game. We haven't really seen him. I think he's made 2 substitute appearances in the Premier League, so we haven't really seen that form that won Norwich City points at the back end of last season. Of course, he scored the goals against Blackburn and Aston Villa to secure Norwich's title, and he hasn't really been able to leave his mark in the Premier League yet because of that injury. So yeah, potential return for him of Bournemouth. Norwich City will be hoping to bolster their midfield options and just give Daniel Farke a little bit of something different to think about in that regard, because Mario Vrancic, of course, was a massive figure in the back end of Norwich City's Championship campaign, and perhaps partnered with a Mo Leitner, a Kenny McLean, can offer Norwich City's midfield something that they don't have currently. And then we're going on to really the other defensive midfielder, Tom Tribal. Of course, it was an ankle injury for him, ligament damage in his ankle, in his foot, suffered at that West Ham game, and that pretty much ruled him out ever since. And again, I think Farke initially gave a timeline of that Bournemouth game as one for a return for Tom Tribal. It's going to be interesting. We've seen him with a protective boot on his ankle in some of his Instagram pictures, some of his wife's Instagram pictures as well. Daniel Farke will be hoping that he's another option for the midfield against Bournemouth, who are a side who like to attack and like to flow men forward, and will no doubt exploit the space that Norwich City leave them. Of course, if they leave the space that they left against Aston Villa, then that is going to be a field day for the likes of Callum Wilson, Josh King, players like that at Bournemouth who will punish you from those positions. So to have those more defensively minded options, we've spoken a little bit about Alex Teti, also Tom Tribal as well, will be massive for Norwich City. I think they've lacked a screener really all season, but Tribal can do that job effectively. He's proven that in the Championship. He'd probably like a run of games to show his worth in the Premier League as well. We didn't really see it in that opening run, although he did play in that Newcastle game where Norwich City were very good and were probably at the height of their powers really in terms of the squad available to them. So he's another one to come back potentially for Bournemouth, and Daniel Farke again will be hoping that he can. And this international break to me feels like the perfect opportunity to try and get 2, 3, 4 of those players currently occupying the treatment rooms in Colney back to full fitness and try and nurse them back for the run ahead. Of course, Norwich City have Bournemouth, Manchester United at home, and then Brighton away, so potentially games where they can pick up points. So it will be interesting to see just who is available for then. Okay, we're getting to the back end of this now. I promise there are a lot of injuries for Norwich at the moment. The next being Onel Hernandez. Now, this was the freak injury where he fell down his stairs and injured his knee. And of course, there was some initial fear from Daniel Farke that he was going to be out for the season. Luckily, that's not the case. His initial sort of timeline again was sort of Christmas time when we could expect to see Onel Hernandez. But last week at the pre-match press conference for Aston Villa, Daniel Farke delivered the news that Hernandez was ahead of schedule in terms of his recovery, and did even mention him for the Bournemouth game, although I think that may come a little bit too soon just by the amount of time he's had and the amount of time it's going to take him to get fully up to speed with the intensity of a Premier League fixture. If we think of Norwich City's attack recently, they've had Campbell and Buendia on either side, probably two similar players in terms of how they want to unlock doors, don't have blistering pace, but do want to combine with Pukki and Stiepermann and try and play round and play defenders out of the game almost. What Norwich have lacked is that direct approach who can penetrate defences, just to give them a different dimension, and that is on Hernandez in a nutshell. Of course, he's probably quite a frustrating footballer. I think most would agree with that. His end product isn't quite always what we'd want, but wingers are quite inconsistent by nature. But just his pace and just giving Daniel Farke a different option to work with in terms of his attacking side would be much needed, I think, and supporters would like to see that, because I think teams have worked out Norwich from an offensive sense a little bit in terms of getting the ball into crossing positions, and then they pretty much have to come back and try and work pullbacks, whereas Hernandez is probably a bit more accustomed to being in those areas as well. So he's someone who hopefully we'll see sooner than we thought, although I probably suspect we're still looking November as a realistic time frame for Onel Hernandez, but we'll see what the verdict is from Daniel Farke come that pre-match press conference against Bournemouth. Maybe an option from the bench, who knows. Okay, now we're getting on to the final two, the two centre-backs who are out for really the prolonged period of time, the two lengthy injuries for Norwich City centre-backs, Christoph Zimmermann and Tim Klose. Let's start with Zimmermann, of course. Just recovered from an injury that he suffered in pre-season. Sebastian Aller with a sliding challenge. It was late. I don't think it was malicious in terms of intent, but it was a nasty challenge in terms of execution. It was a complicated injury. Daniel Farke feared initially for his whole career in terms of how it was. Of course, we had Christoph Zimmermann in this building, and he spoke about his injury at length. There's a video on the PinkUn YouTube channel of him speaking to my colleague Paddy Dabbert, which is a very good watch, of him speaking about basically his ligaments in his foot, which he has damaged. We saw him on Saturday though for the first time without crutches. It was just almost a reduced protective boot that we've seen. Usually they're sort of knee high, and we've seen that those knee high boots on players before. This one sort of just went just above the ankle, so hopefully that's a good sign that Zimmermann's injury is progressing as they should wish. Of course, Zimmermann is a physical centre back who is almost quite old-fashioned in the way that he engages in physical battles. And if I recall the way Wesley bullied, I think bully's not too strong a word, bullied Amadou and Godfrey on Saturday, that really is what Norwich City lack at the moment. And particularly if you look at their aerial duel stats, they are pretty low down, might even be bottom of that table in terms of their aerial duels. Christoph Zimmermann, of course, is a massive presence in that Norwich City side, was captain for a lot of last season. I think he lifted the trophy at Villa Park as well. So on the pitch he's massive, off the pitch he's huge as well. He's literally massive as well, so that's all three boxes ticked for Christoph Zimmermann. We're not expecting to see him until about the 11th of January. Maybe the FA Cup third round could be a good sign for him, although when he came in he did say he hoped to be playing before the new year. But again, we're talking about a long-term injury and then getting a player back up to speed, so that could be the time frame for Christoph Zimmermann. And then of course his colleague Tim Klose, very similar, had a little bit of an injury in pre-season, came back, featured in the EFL Cup defeat to Crawley Town, and of course within the first half gets a contact injury and is off. That's a knee injury, and that is his cruciate ligaments as well. Luckily he didn't need surgery on this, so initially it was meant to be 9 months, although then Farke did say that it would probably be about 7 or 8 now, which I mean isn't great news for Tim Klose at the age of 31 to get such a major injury, and of course isn't good news for Norwich City either. It feels like Tim Klose at different points of his Norwich City career have got injuries which have affected the group. If we think about his first season, came in and got injured at Selhurst Park, and I think a lot of Norwich City supporters would probably pinpoint that as the moment it all fell apart for Norwich City in the Premier League. We're all aware of his ability. Probably one of Norwich City's most balanced centre-backs in terms of how he can play with his feet, as well as his presence and his physical ability as well. So it looks like it's probably going to be next pre-season that we see Tim closer. Hopefully, after this video and after this international break, we won't spend too much time speaking about injuries, because I feel like I could now go and act on an episode of Holby City quite comfortably with all the medical terms I've learned over the last few weeks. I'm sure Daniel Farke feels that way as well. He's been fairly deflated for him in recent press conferences, and of course Norwich City's performance on Saturday may have been a culmination of those injuries, and no doubt the confidence will have been sucked out of this group in terms of seeing another player succumb to injury as well. So if they can get 4 or 5 players back, that could be the lift they need to really kickstart their season. Of course, that first game against Bournemouth is going to be really intriguing. I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully there are 4 or 5 Norwich City players back, and Daniel Farke has a host of options available to him, enough to cause him a headache after the selection crisis. Of course, on Saturday we saw Archie Mayer-Akin Feimu on the bench as well. So hopefully that's a situation we don't see the other side of the international break, and Norwich City can progress and maintain their mission, because what we don't want is this season to be remembered for the wrong reasons, but equally to be remembered for injuries, because after all the hard work that Norwich City put to getting into the Premier League in the first place, that would be a massive shame. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you leave a like on whatever platform you are watching this on, and make sure you share it as well. And if you like the content on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching.